Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore. And my name is Lin Jing. I'm a research fellow here, and it's my big pleasure to be your moderator today. We are very pleased to have Dr. She Gangzheng with us today. Dr. She is a tenure associate professor in Department of International Relations at Tsinghua University at Beijing, in Beijing, and director of its Center for Overseas Security. This academic year, Dr. She is also a visiting scholar at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. And his research focuses on the Middle East from the Cold War to the present, especially the roles of China and other major powers in the region. And his works have been published in leading journals such as the Chinese Journal of International Politics, Journal of Cold War Studies, Mediterranean Politics, and the Middle East Policy, as well as by think tanks like the Atlantic Council and ISPI in Italy. So today, Dr. She will speak on China's strategy in the Middle East and prospects for the US-China engagement. Actually, we've seen in recent years the Middle East has again become a testing ground for great power relations, while US-China competition has intensified globally. The region still offers important opportunities for dialogue and even cooperations, especially through what we call Chat 2 and semi-official channels. And so Dr. She will share insights from his experience in such dialogues, and we will discuss how China and the United States approach the region in times of tension and whether cooperation is still possible despite growing competition. Um, we will begin with Dr. She's presentation, and after the talk, we have time for Q&A sessions. And please feel free to submit your questions to the Q&A box. So without further ado, Dr. She, thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate the kind invitation from Dr. Lin and from the Middle East Institute at NUS. So it's my honor to give a talk today. But I really look forward that beyond sharing my own observations, I look forward to the dialogue with the audience. And there's a lot of room for discussions, for debates regarding the current, the ongoing Chinese foreign policy towards the Middle East and interactions between the great powers like China and the United States in this part of the world. Okay, so before I delve into the presentation about China's foreign policy and also the ongoing some track two dialogues between China and the United States regarding the Middle Eastern issues, I should have a small disclaimer here that the content that I share today is based on my personal observation, and I don't speak for any governmental sectors or the institutions either in China or here at Harvard. Okay, so so I will briefly develop my part into two sections. Okay, so I will first talk about my understanding about the ongoing Chinese foreign policy towards the Middle East, and then I will also talk about some aspects that I think it is important and it is ongoing between the discussions between China and the United States regarding the Middle Eastern affairs, and then I think Dr. Lin will have some arrangement for the Q&A session. Okay, so first of all, about China's Middle East policy, I think many of you have some sense about what has been the primary considerations behind Beijing's moves in the last three decades also. Okay, because I think after 1949, there has been several major changes in Beijing's foreign policy towards the Middle East. So first we have this kind of like the some uncertainty years that China wants to have differentiate friends and foes. So first, very interestingly, that the first country in the Middle East to recognize the People's Republic of China as the legitimate representative of the whole China, it's actually the state of Israel. But state of Israel was actually the last country in the region that established diplomatic relations with Beijing. So there has been twists and turns, ups and downs between the relations between China and different Middle Eastern players in the last several decades. We went through some radical revolutionary years, and then in the last 3 decades, a very fundamental features is that China adopt this kind of like economy first policy. Okay, so when discussing nowadays the ongoing policies about China towards the Middle East, we should first definitely to emphasize the continuation for the last 3 decades that China still has largely focused on fostering this kind of like economic development-centric relations with the regional regional players. So regarding the regional politics, I think China is still adhering to someone we call as the strategic hedging between different conflicting parties in the region, like between the United States and Iran, or between other pairs of the competitors or adversaries. To some extent, you can see this kind of like a continuation that in many of the regional conflicts, China didn't have or doesn't have a very strong political stance to completely side with one to against the other. So this is something that I will argue that this is definitely some kind of like a continuation for the last 3 decades or more. But at the same time, we should also notice that in the last few years, I think it's in particular in the last 2 years, starting from 2023 to now, there also been some kind of like new breakthroughs or new practice activities or thinking in China's way of dealing with the Middle Eastern issues. What I would call that this is kind of like the attempt. We cannot say this is the definite forms or the definite format or the formation of China's new model, but there's definitely some kind of like attempts out there that China trying to be the enabler of some kind of like a new agreements or the new realities. Okay, so what we've seen very obviously, for example, there is the contribution by China towards some reconciliation in the region. Most notably is the rapprochement between Riyadh and Tehran, right? And also, I think last year China also has some kind of like attempted moves trying to like gather around the 14 factions of the Palestinian organizations to issue this Beijing declaration. Okay, so there will be a lot of debate, as I know that there's a lot of debate about how should we make sense about this kind of like new changes. But I think this is kind of like something that we could discuss in much more details today, because I think nowadays there has been two trends or two kind of like tendencies in explaining China's capability, not only in the Middle East but also around the world. For example, there are some kind of like expressions or some kind of like arguments to say that, oh, China definitely have huge say in a lot of like regional issues outside Indo-Pacific. For example, like President Zelensky of Ukraine say in the UN General Assembly that if China wants, it can end the war between Russia and Ukraine overnight, right? Without China, Russia under Putin is nothing, something like that. And also we have heard some kind of other rhetoric to say that, oh, China definitely have much more resources or much more options to put pressures on the Houthis. And for example, if China won, it can also end the crisis in the Red Sea in a short period of time, or something like that. Okay, so this is kind of like something to trying to maximize China's role or capabilities in conflicts in other part of the world or in the Middle East in particular. But there's also other some kind of like a saying or rhetorics to say that, oh, no matter the war in Ukraine or the crisis in the Middle East, the wars in the Middle East shows the limit of China's power. Okay, shows how few things that China actually can do or can contribute. So it shows the weakness of the limits of the projection of China's power, and in contrast, it reflects the powerful the still powerful dominance of the United States also. Okay, so I think these are two very popular rhetorics we can hear from time to time regarding China's presence or China's behavior or China's efforts in regions like the Middle East. I think that I agree that there are some points that make sense to some extent in both rhetorics, but I think that if we like choose, if we completely buy one like side of the story, I think we will be misguided. So I think we need to take a kind of like a more comprehensive view about China's role or China's kind of like behavior in the region, such as the Middle East. So this is what I will argue, that we cannot use the traditional, or in other words, the dominantly like Western ideas or terminology or definition to define or decipher whether China is becoming the new game changer or not, because many practice that China is now actually doing does not fit perfectly within the previous definitions as we read, for example, in the Western textbook about IR, about the regional politics. So this is something that I will argue here, but I would definitely be willing to speak more about how should we make sense about this kind of like acts or the moves that China did, for example, in particular in the rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians, or between different factions of the Palestinians. Okay, so this is the second point, and then the third point I want to make is that I think it is very important to see to know that in the last few years, China's focus in the Middle East is very unbalanced. And there's, although behind the rhetorics of the foreign ministry that China is always adhere to the peace and prosperity of the region, we respect the equality of the equal standards stance of the sovereignty of all nations, no matter you're big or small or something like that. I think actually China has shown clear preference when dealing with certain type of the regimes in the region. And to my own understanding, I think that China is definitely trying to do business with all the parties in the region, but the focus of China is more focused on those society or those countries that put development as their own priority. So no matter which type of regime that you have back home, if you have this kind of like a huge like a incentive, you have this kind of like huge momentum or clear definition, clear manifesto about development, you focus on development, China is definitely have much more interest in dealing with you, in fostering more cooperative, deeper relations with these kind of countries. And in the Middle Eastern cases, I think where it's very clear that China definitely has much more focuses, attentions that has been put on the GCC countries, on those kind of like North African countries. So this is like I think this is the type of developmental countries that China find most easy to deal with and to deepen their relations. In contrast, I think there are other countries, no matter whether you classify them as the theocracy or democracy or other type of like terminology used in the Western textbooks, or no matter you have like a high GDP per capita or low GDP per capita, but if your society is functioning on this kind of like I think to Beijing's eyes in this kind of like abnormal ways, and China will definitely have lower like priorities when dealing with you regarding different kind of like methods. And to my observation, I think very clearly that although, for example, Iran and Israel in the last few years definitely have some kind of like a great potential to work more deeply with China, China didn't put these countries as the priority in the list when dealing with these countries, because I think to China, no matter Tehran or Tel Aviv or those countries as the background states, they are all belonging to this kind of like a non-developmental group or developmental like a type of countries, because the society or the government, due to one reason or another, have put something else other than the development as the priority of the project, of the overall goals. So I think this is something that I will argue that before the 2003 the Hamas attack into Israel, and also for these 2 long years, like catastrophe in humanitarian sense, and also the worsening situation earlier this year between Iran and Israel. I think China will think that the good thing is that the conflict is still limited to this kind of like a conflicting parties or the countries between them, but not have this kind of like huge spillover effect on other part of the region to affect those developmental countries. However, as we've seen in recent weeks, there has been some kind of like a growing concerns that there might be some spillover into other part of the region to affect the so-called developmental states. I think one of the most striking cases is that both Iran and Israel attacked Qatar in their exchange of fire since June to September, due to different reasons, due to logic, but that fact itself speaks that for a very concerning or worrying signs for Beijing. So I think this is something that we can see some kind of like new focus or challenges for China to deal with in the new scenarios regarding its foreign policy towards the region. So this is some, I think this is some grand observation about China's foreign policy in the last few years towards the Middle East. So next, I will briefly share some kind of like my thoughts about the ongoing some practice, some activities between China and the United States regarding the exploration, I would call it exploration, about whether there is some kind of like new opportunities to to cooperate in the Middle East. So in the last 2 years, I would say that there has been some regular meetings between Chinese scholars from different universities and different institutes, together with our counterparts in the US, some universities, some think tanks, to meet regularly other in the third countries. Okay, although I'm part of the effort, but I'm sorry I cannot name the names. Okay, but I can only say that there's a group of people that, although there's no kind of like affiliation to the government, there's all kind of like connections in either China or the US. So I think that in the last 2 years, this track two meeting has been pretty meaningful. And also, I think actually matches something that I have advocated for many years. I think even before, I think Trump took his office in first term, that I have been arguing that uh, to my understanding, there's no fundamental clash of interest between China and the United States to the west of Malacca. In to the east of Malacca, there might be some kind of like fundamental clashes, the potential of conflicts or even military conflicts in Asia Pacific. But to the west of Malacca, I don't believe there's a fundamental clash of interest in between these two great powers. And even when there's a huge debate or huge very heated topic, like China is now having this kind of like a great power competition in the Middle East with the United States, and the Middle East will be the crossfire. We'll witness the crossfire between these two great powers in the region, something like that. I always adhere to kind of like this belief, because I think that the most important features that in this new era, the great power competition that is different from the last period of great power competition, which is the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. Nowadays, we are seeing this asymmetric competition between the great powers that China, United States, Russia, or European countries. Now, all these great powers are having this kind of like asymmetric competitions with each other, which is quite different from the symmetric confrontation, symmetric rivalry between the USSR and the United States during the Cold War. So one very, very important features of the new geopolitics phenomenon around the world is that every country, like almost every country, no matter where you are, is actually trying to have this like a fence-sitting or strategic hedging strategy to deal with different great powers. That means that they will have less incentive to completely side with one to against the other. They will just trying to play one against the other. Okay, to use one great power as the leverage to maximize their deal with another one. But at the same time, in essence, they will keep working with different great powers at the same time in different subjects, in different areas, in different aspects. Okay, so I think this is something that has both pros and cons for the great powers, but the good thing is that this actually minimize or actually decrease the likelihood of this kind of like a block-like confrontation between great powers, and also actually I think decrease the likelihood of the direct military confrontation between the great powers. And one most prominent examples about strategic hedging between great powers is the country in the Middle East. So no matter you are a decision maker in Beijing or you're a decision maker in Washington, I think you need to face squarely this new phenomenon that all the third countries would not easily side with you completely, or we can say that it is almost virtually impossible for one country to side you completely. You can either expect that one country will side completely with the US to decouple completely from China, or you can hardly expect countries to completely side with China in any case to fight against the United States. So I think this is the new reality that every country is now practicing, and then the decision maker of China and the United States, the sooner they realize this is the new trend or this is the trajectory for the next few years or the decade, I think this sooner the better they will have some kind of like a meaningful dialogue or meaningful cooperation in different regional issues. Because the benefit of trying to recruit allies to completely decouple from your adversaries, the benefits will be quite low compared to the resources you devoted into recruiting them. Okay, so this is something that I always believe, and then I think that in this dialogue between Chinese, in these track two dialogues between the Chinese and their American counterparts, I think there's a growing consensus also about this kind of like understanding. And there are many kind of like practice in our discussions about how to better understand each other's concerns or the interest. I would say that it is worth striking that both Chinese and the Americans actually share a lot of things. They have a lot of things in common. Especially there are many kind of like important principles that I think both parties are completely with each other. And during this kind of like dialogues and during this kind of like interactions, we also deepening the belief that the other side is genuine belief in the value of this kind of like principles. So I think this is a good thing for us or for the U.S. counterparts to have some kind of like a recommendation for the decision making circles. I think this is something that I think that might be a positive development through this track two dialogues. However, at the same time, I must admit that the devil lies in the details. That although we can sense, we can have this kind of like a common understanding on some general principles. I think the main issue for now is that how to locate the source of problems or how to uphold these principles is the most challenging part that we are now actually we are actually now facing. A very interesting case will be, for example, the Red Sea security about the sea route or the sea lane, commercial lane, something like that. And I think both the Chinese and the US completely agree that sea lane security is important, is crucial for the region and for the global economy and for the stability for many parties in the region or in the extra-regional sense. However, I think there's something when we talk details that how to how to solve the problem, for example, about the sea lane security issue, I will say that there will be some kind of like a disagreement in our discussions. So for the U.S. part, I would not say everyone agree this is the understanding in the U.S., but some of them, at least a large portion of the U.S. experts will argue that the problem of the external source of the Yemen issue or the Red Sea problem lies in Iran. Okay, so definitely, the solution, if we deduct from this kind of like observation, will be that if we give enough pressure on Tehran, that might fundamentally cut off the resources that was given to the Houthis and might eventually solve this kind of like the harassment of the Houthis on the commercial ships, okay, across the Red Sea. But I think for me and some other Chinese counterparts, and also I would not say that everyone agree in the same line, but there's also kind of like a understanding from Chinese side that we think that if you just focus on giving pressure to Iran, just giving too much pressure to Tehran, that will only have this kind of like the opposite effect because a more insecure Tehran will have more incentive to provide resources to its process or to its partners to diversify its pressure to have like to create more trouble in the region. So this is something that we will argue that it is very clear that the problem, the ongoing war in Gaza, provide a very legitimate course for some actions that Houthis is doing. Although we don't agree with like the what they are doing, but definitely the actions that Israel is now doing in Gaza provide some good excuse for the Houthis to attack the ships, especially like to Israel or from Israel. So I think this is something that if you want to have a long term, if you want to have a comprehensive solution about the Red Sea problem, about Houthi attack or harassment of the commercial sea routes, I think countries should do more to put pressures into the relevant parties in the Israel-Palestinian conflicts by solving these problems and together with other problems that will create some kind of like basis for solving the attack on the commercial ships in the Red Sea. So I think this is something that both countries agree that sea lane security is important, is vital. But how to solve these problems, how to uphold these principles, there will be kind of like many discussions. But I think the important thing is that with this kind of like dialogues, both parties now have like a growing understanding about the logic of each other and about this kind of the mechanism that we have in the discussions or the consultations about their respective experts in our two countries. So I think this is have some kind of like good news or some foundations for future cooperations. So I think there are several directions that China and the United States, at least in our group, in our like a platform, our mechanism, they're trying to have to pay more attention to. The first thing is definitely the Red Sea. I just gave the example in. The second one will be the Iran-Israel like conflicts, and we have different kind of like proposals. I cannot talk in much more details, but I will share that it is like there has been some kind of like advice that how China and the United States might work together to the parties that are more close to them to have kind of like a simultaneous de-escalation, this kind of effort to avoid worsening of such kind of like conflicts. And also, I think there is a long-term prospect about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. But I personally, I will be pretty pessimistic about the solution in the near future. But there's some kind of like a discussion along the way about what might be China's role in the post-war kind of like a reconstruction efforts. But I don't think, but this is my own observation, but I don't think that in the near future there will be a easy answer or clear solution for this issue. So it might be premature to talk about like in details about what exact role that China will play in the reconstruction of Gaza. So this is something that we have in our discussions, and I think it was like a pretty meaningful endeavor that we are going to continue this kind of like efforts, and hopefully that in the next few years there might be some results that we can see whether either on the surface or below the surface that the great powers might have some cooperations regarding the Middle Eastern affairs. And most important, I think this is also the purpose of this mechanism. That I think we believe that I think also to the Singaporeans, I think it is also I guess some of you agree that the relations between China and the United States might be the most important bilateral relations in the world. And but we think that it will be quite difficult to have the if we cannot just solve those most sensitive issues overnight. We cannot rebuild the political trust starting from those most sensitive issues, for example, Taiwan or South China Sea, etc. Maybe there is a good possibility that we start from something like outside. We start from something in the Middle East that we share common interest for the status quo, for the development of the region. Although we might have different definition about status quo, we might have different definition about development, but maybe this is a good avenue for rebuilding the political trust between China and the United States after a year since the pivotal Asia policy was raised. So hopefully there will be some positive results. Okay, Dr. Lin, I will stop here.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Sher, for your, I say, informative and timely insights. And your talk actually raises a lot of questions, important questions about how both China and the United States approach the Middle East differently, not just from a geopolitical standpoint, but also, I say, in terms of shared principles, as you mentioned, and responsibilities for regional stabilities and developments and this kind of important issues. So let's now move to the Q&A session. While we are waiting for the audience to type in their questions into the Q&A box, I'll start with a few questions and to start the discussion, and then we can have some, I say, freely more candid discussion on these issues. So my first question is actually China's real role in the Saudi Iran agreement. Actually, because you also mentioned during your presentation that there were a lot of debates about China's stance or China's strategy in the Middle East, especially for the recent 2 or 3 years. China's becoming a little bit more proactive. And there has been this obvious debate about China's real role in this certain agreement, like the Saudi-Iran rapprochement. So some will argue that the Iraq and Oman, those regional countries, have already laid most of the groundwork. They will say a lot of negotiations, not lot of rounds of negotiations have been done in those countries, and then China simply stepped in at the final stage So it's more like a free rider, or it's more like a gift to China. So uh, what was your assessment, or what's your opinion, and and how would you respond to this kind of arguments or view?
I think this is a very, very important question, and I think there will be definitely many dimensions to assess that how China is successful or not as a broker or as the guarantor of these deals. So I will share my point of view here. The first thing is that definitely I think the regional other first that we must recognize there is a huge incentive in both Riyadh and Tehran to reach this kind of like a rapprochement or this kind of like a de-escalation or ceasefire between their strategic rivalry for quite a few years. That I think this is a very important prerequisite for China to play a role in the mediation. So this is first thing, and then the second thing is that the regional other regional stakeholders like Iraq, you mentioned, and Oman, they definitely played an important role in providing the space for or even the participations in this kind of like dialogue in the attempt in this kind of a rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians. And also, I think China also recognize and acknowledge the contribution of all these countries in fostering better relations between the great powers of the region, namely Saudi Arabia and Islamic Republic of Iran. But at the same time, what I want to say here is that the uh, the the uh, the fact that they choose Beijing to announce the deal, I think this itself is a recognition of China's role in playing in this kind of like a mediation. And I think that if they don't believe in China's credibility, or they don't believe in China's role in the process, I don't see any particular reason for they would choose Beijing to be the location to announce such a kind of like important developments. I think the important thing is that beyond the incentive of the bilateral people, the bilateral in the bilateral talks, and also beyond the participation of regional powers, I think China is also present this kind of like prospect for both the Saudis and the Iranians that there might be some kind of like healthy triangular relations in the long run that definitely in the short term there will make both countries easier. But in the long run, I think with China's investment, with China's interest, or with China's commitment in this kind of like a rapprochement, there might be some kind of like prospect that with China's production capabilities, with the capital of Saudi Arabia, with the human sources, human capital of Iran, there might be some kind of like a healthy triangular cooperation or triangular like relations between these three players. So I think this is something that China. I think this is something that I would call that why China should be declassified as an enabler. That it shows this kind of like perspective rather than as a simplified, defined enforcer of the deal. And I don't think China's role as the broker in this deal is similar to what we understand in the traditional Western terms, that you are either a small country, a neutral country like Sweden or Switzerland, or you are a powerful country like the United States. You have the military power, hard power, to enforce the carrying out of the execution of the peace agreements. I think China here is to provide this kind of like alternative, to provide this kind of like a developmental perspective for these countries to this kind of like a conflicting parties that I think if you want to have kind of like other priorities rather than have this kind of like a battle or this conflict with your neighbors, that you might you could have some faith in China to provide this kind of like a connections, and also I think it shows clearly that in the last 2 years after the rapprochement between the Saudi Arabia and Iran, there has been many discussions to say that there's no clause in the agreement that China will do what if one party break the deal. I think this is something that we also need to take this kind of like new perspective in viewing this participation role of China. That I think in current situation that either the Iranians or the Saudis have the interest in reopening this kind of like a new front of confrontations. So this means that the logic of Beijing's participation in fostering this kind of like a rapprochement still works nowadays.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shi. So basically, China is in a way that development can solve a lot of problems. Or you'll say the economic development will be a medicine to the local regional crisis. I
Sorry,
mean,
what?
it's
Mm.
like economic development can actually solve a lot of problems in the region.
I think that this is not to say that the economy will solve all the problems,
Mm-hmm.
but I think with this kind of like a focus of many countries in the region, especially those countries in the GCC or in North Africa, that if you have these ideas that your country want to catch up with the rival of the digital era, we want to catch up with this kind of like a new development in science, in technology, that if you want to put your priority to the social priority or national priority into developments, China provide this kind of like I cannot say the comprehensive solution for your development project, but at least I think China will provide many kind of like opportunities. So if you want to stay in this kind of like confrontational mode, if you want to have this kind of like problems, that's okay. That's China won't like kind of like to give directions to say direct order to say that okay, you need to move from this direction to another direction. But if you want to have some kind of like developments in your own countries, I think China will provide this kind of like solutions out
Solution.
there.
Mhm.
And in the long run, I think this will help solve some kind of like problems.
Okay, actually, this is very related to a question raised by our colleague Zainab from MEI, and we can see that from the Q&A box. And her question is, do you see China's role in the Middle East becoming more significant in the future, particularly in political or military terms?
Mm. Okay, so I think this is a very important aspect that we need to continue to observe in the future. I think definitely China will become more and more prominent in the political like aspects, although it might not be in the same way as I argued before, not in the same way that the traditional Western powers will play in the region, and China might have its own kind of like a contribution, as we did see in the Palestinian case, in the Saudi Iranian cases, that China might have some kind of like a creative creativity in showing its political interest in the region. I think the reason is that China realize that with this kind of like participation of the local countries, it might be possible to have this kind of like a longer or just more just like a new order in the region. And this kind of like a new order, if possible, that might be beneficial for China as well, for its own development, for its like BRI, for its continuation of developments. So I guess that China will be more and more prominent in the political terms. As regards to the military terms, I think it is there will be many factors. I think the fundamental issue is that China did increase its presence of military power in the region, as we can see in the last decade, naval base in Djibouti, and there are some rumors about China's like establishment about other military bases in Oman or in UAE. But there's also we can see the development out there is that when there is strong U.S. objections, China don't have any kind of like interest to forcefully push forward these. I don't know how true it is, this kind of like projects. It also shows that China didn't set its priority to confront the United States militarily in the region as its goal. So I think what China worry more is that would there be a rapid withdrawal of the US from the region rather than there will be kind of like a military confrontation between the US and China in the region. I think for in at least in my understanding, if there is some kind of like a rapid withdrawal, like in Afghanistan in 2021 or in South Vietnam in 1970s, I think that would be more problematic for China to continue its kind of like a ongoing political or economic ties with the region.
Thank you. And we've got another question from Clemens Chai, a research fellow at MEI, and it is sent to my chat box. So I read out for you,
Mm,
and and he says and that you said China has not been strongly committed to a single party in the Middle East, as we always see that China has been avoiding taking side, right, in the Middle East. But how do you assess China's approach to the Israel-Hamas war? It seems that it is leaning towards the Arab leaderships. It seems like it's taking side of the Arab countries, and 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 actually that's also one of my questions that I wanted to ask you is like the China stance in the Israel-Hamas war, and China
mm,
didn't condemn Hamas by its name,
mm,
and actually it triggered Israel a lot. And then, uh,
mm.
and what was the consideration?
Mm. Okay, so I think China's dealing with the Israel-Hamas war has also raised many question or debates. I think that's for sure that we during our discussions with some countries, including Israel, we also have this discussions in all these issues. So I think there are two uh, uh, or more elements. I will say here. The first one is the historical element. Okay, the historical element is that China has been at least a very kind of like active supporter of the Palestinian cause long before the 2023 Israel-Hamas war. Okay, so I think China was the first non-Arab great powers in the world to recognize the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinians, while back then Egypt, Jordan still holds Gaza and West Bank. So I think this is something that historically speaking, China has this kind of like continuation to support the right of national nationhood of the Palestinian people, and that would not be easily changed. So this is the first thing, and China has always advocated for this two-state solution. And then since the 1980s, since the King Fahd of Saudi Arabia raised this peace plan between the Arab states, Arab world as a whole with Israel, China has always been a supporter out there. So I think this is something that we should set in the background as we consider these things. And the second thing is about the points that I think this is some kind of like an accusation, especially from the friendly of Israel, to accuse China that why don't you support Israel in the war against the Hamas, in the war against terrorism, etc.? And why can't you be more supportive of Israel? Something like that. So I would say that the issue is not that China is not supportive enough towards Israel. The problem here is that what kind of like day after picture that you are providing as the Israelis. I think from my own observation, there were so many different conflicting plans for the post-war Gaza, or even for the solution of Gaza, right? And there are different kind of like conflicting kind of ideas that how should you deal with how should the Israelis deal with Gaza. So when this is the case, then you don't have a clear kind of like a consensus, a very clear cut a picture about the long term or short term and long term solution of Gaza. How can you expect country like China with its own huge amount of populations of Muslim people to say that, oh, I'm here for Israel, I'm supportive of Israel. I think this is something that very clearly very rational for China to not be like supportive of Israel about what he says, about what he did in Gaza. Although I personally I understand there is like the it's a natural development about this kind of polarization of the Israeli society in the last decade that lead to kind of like I would call the dysfunctional of a proper society or proper government in Israel nowadays. So this is something that I would say as the second point. And then the third point I would say then is that although Chinese government might be join many countries in condemning Israel's activity, military actions in Gaza, the real kind of like public discussions or the social media in China doesn't reflect this kind of like more one-sided story. If you take a look at the social media of China, you can see fierce debate between the pro-Palestinians and the pro-Israeli like social media users. And because I think it was overshadowed by the huge debate among the social media users in the West, in particular in the United States, that few pay enough attention to this same or similar scenario in China as well.
Well, thank you. We have reached to the end of our session, but we still have questions coming in. So I suggest maybe we take the last one question, and then you can see it from the Q&A box.
Mm,
It is from our colleague at East Asia Institute, Dr. Yu
mm,
Hong. And I think his question is about the IMEC, the Indian Middle East Europe Economic Corridor,
mm,
and this is a US-backed internal regional initiative,
mm,
and so his question is, how does China see its economic viability as well as prospect, and is it truly credible to compare the IMAC with the BRI in terms of scale influence?
Okay, thank you for this scholar's incredible question. I think this is also a question that we have in Beijing for some internal academic discussions. So I think I will share my point of view here. The second question first. Okay, so I think that it is not so similar about these two projects. Okay, the IMEC and the BRI, I think that it is completely on different kind of like levels, and especially in the context of China nowadays, BRI has been becoming an umbrella. Okay, everything in Chinese foreign practice can be put into this basket or put under this umbrella called BRI. So I think this is kind of like a to me, I think PRI now is almost equals to foreign policy of China nowadays. So this is my answer to the second question. I agree that there is not on the same scale, that it is might not be a proper way to directly compare these two initiative or plans, because the BI is no longer simply just a plan or a simple initiative anymore. Okay, so this is the second question, and then the first question. I think that there has been a huge debate in China, especially among the Middle East experts, regarding the viability about this the possibility of the IMEC, the corridor planned. But to me, I think that it is quite it is a natural choice of the countries along the line to both work with China under the umbrella of the BRI and choose another plan or another project to work. As I mentioned before, I think most of countries will choose to be like to adopt this strategy hedging. So byproduct of this phenomenon is the institutional redundant. Okay, so every country will simultaneously join in different kind of like initiative into different kind of like a group of countries, into different kind of organizations, and also into different initiative or plans or corridors or kind of development projects at the same time. You could use the different names for the same projects along the way. So there will be all this kind of like a same development in the same kind of like a area of your country, that you can claim to Chinese that this is the product of our cooperation with BRI, and to the US to say that, oh, this is development of the IMEC, that we show the respect for any initiative that raised by Washington. So I think this is something that if I'm the decision maker in China, I would have quite a calm stance in viewing the continuation or the development of the IMEC. I don't think this will be a completely exclusive project, even though Washington might have such kind of like mindset in proposing these ideas, but I don't think the regional players will carry it out in this way.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Shi, and thanks to all participants for joining us this morning. And this has been a deeply engaging discussion, and we hope today's conversation contributes to a better understanding of how dialogue, formal and informal, can still play a role amid great power competitions, and how China's strategy is approached in the region. So have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you at our next MEI event. Thank you very much, Professor Shi.
Okay, thank you for having me today. Goodbye.